Well, hello again. We're in the pathway, aren't we? Today we're going to cover the fear of the Lord. We're going to cover it from two different angles today, actually. But what exactly is the fear of the Lord? What am I talking about when I say the fear of the Lord? And maybe a better question is, what is an unhealthy and what is a healthy fear of God? Because we can have a fear of God or a fear of the Lord, and it can be very unhealthy. And for the most part, that is where most people are at when we say the fear of the Lord. They suddenly have something that comes before their mind of failure or that they're falling short. And what an unhealthy fear of God is a wrong concept of God. And that concept is that you see that God is a punisher, and that you never measure up, and so you're always waiting to be punished. And that's really a very unhealthy fear of God. Now, a healthy fear of God is a reverence for God. It is a looking of awe and respect and honor that's deserved God because He is God. And so there's a big paradigm difference between God as a punisher and God is worthy and respected and honored. So let's talk about this a little bit to begin with, and let's look at a definition of fear. Now, Webster's defines fear in a general term for something that causes anxiety and agitation, and that it is felt when something dangerous is present. Now, if you think about it, the fear of God, we shouldn't have anxiety or agitation when we're around God. And fear can also mean something, a concern that something's going to happen to me. But really, the real definition of fear that Webster's also gives is the fear or the awe-struck of something that has gained our attention. And that's really the fear of God. When you're not in right standing with God, you might have some anxiety about God's presence or being around God. But that is not how a Christian is supposed to be living. We're supposed to be living in a healthy fear and not a fear that we are believing that we're deserving punishment constantly. So let's look at some verses here. Let me pull up some notes. For you've not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you've received the spirit of adoption whereby we cry, Abba, Father. Now you notice here in this verse, he's tying together the spirit of bondage and that spirit of bondage creates fear. Now that's important to understand because the spirit of adoption is what we are as Christians have experienced, and that's to replace the spirit of bondage. In other words, God is wanting us to realize that we're not to have a spirit of fear and be bound up with that spirit of bondage, which it creates a binding in our lives. And one of the things that it does is that fear factor. And so what happens is when we begin to entertain that kind of fear and a fear towards God, we actually have a fear towards everything in life because we don't see God in our life like we should. We don't see Him actually for us and not against us. We don't see Him working in our life. And so what happens is you're actually fighting against your adoption is what happens. You find yourself almost sitting at a place where you're opposed to God and what He might do in your life. And you fear that you're going to make the right decisions or do the right things. Let's look at another verse here. Timothy. 2 Timothy 1:7, for God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Now, God has given us a spirit not of fear. And then He lists what He gives us. He states that there is a source that we have that's completely different from the spirit of fear. What are those things? Power, love, and a sound mind, which means the opposite of power, love, and a sound mind is fear. So it means that we believe we're powerless, we do not feel loved, and our mind is not fixed on who God is in our life and what he'll do. We're fixed on being punished for what we're doing. But the opposite is what's true. He gives us power, dunamis, the nature of God. He gives us love, agape, the highest form of love. He gives us a sound mind, which means sound judgment and able to control your thinking and your thoughts. So all of us fight fears from time to time. And the question really comes is, where did these fears that we have originate in our lives? For many of us, it may have been a long time ago. For some of us, we may be living in past fears in a current state. So let's dissect it just a little bit and see what it is. So really, there's only two fears that you're actually born with. We all have a fear of falling. In other words, we know instinctively to put out our hands to embrace, the fall that we're about to experience, or if we fall sideways, we'll put our hands to the side. It's a natural instinct to protect ourselves. We also have a fear of loud sounds, which means that a large sound startles us, like thunder, fireworks, a gunshot, a car wreck, something that's extremely loud, which is out of the normal of what our ears are hearing, and so it startles us. And that gets our attention. And those are actually the only two fears that we have, that we are born with. And all of us have those fears instinctively put into us. Sometimes these healthy fears can actually save your life. A loud sound may tell you to get out of the way. The fear of falling, if you don't put your hands out, you may get really hurt. And so these fears were fears that God put in us for our benefit. But then there are many fears in life that grip us in life. And we all have those kinds of fears. Many times, believe it or not, many preachers actually have a fear of getting up and speaking in front of somebody, but love compels them to get over their fear. A mom may have fear of their kids getting hurt, and so they look over them a little more, or they make sure that things are cleared so they don't get harmed. We can have a fear of driving in a car. I know a woman who's fighting right now to learn to drive again, has a fear of driving. We can have a fear of planes. We can have a fear of heights. We can have fear even of conversations that need to happen. Some people have fears of doctors and dentists, and we may laugh at it. We all don't like going to the dentist, and the doctor's the same way. Like I tell my doctor that he's good for 2 or 3 points on my blood pressure every time I come to see him, and he told me back, he said he's the same way when he sees his doctor. So we all have these fears. It can even be the economy, or losing our job, or not having enough money, or something that's coming. But a lot of times those fears are also things that have never really occurred in our life yet. We're thinking something's going to happen when I go to the doctor, or thinking something's going to happen when I go to the dentist, and yet nothing really happens. So fear plays on the unknowns that are in our life. Let's look here at Luke 12:22. 22 through 23. And he said unto the disciples, Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, neither for the body what ye shall put on. The life is more than meat, and the body is more than raiment. Well, in this verse, he's telling us that there's things in life that we should not be concerned about. There are things that we should be trusting God, that he has it handled in our life. And so those two fears that we were born with were actually survival fears. And all the other fears that you have are fears that someone actually taught you. So the question is, where did we get taught these wrong fears, or this wrong fear of God? And really it comes down to, most of the time, It was by someone else's experience that they projected towards us. And they made it very compelling for us to believe this certain behavior is going to produce something in your life detrimental, and it started to instill a fear in us. People even can have a fear of failure, which is really the primary focus that fear tries to produce. But then still others have a fear of success because that success is going to create change and responsibility. So what is the pathway to finding out how to combat this fear? Well, it comes down to moving in the opposite of fear. The opposite of fear is faith. Faith is a conviction of truth. Faith means that I trust. I trust God with my life. I trust God with what His Word says. And if I say that I'm fighting a fear, it's actually I'm fighting an area of where I have a lack of trust in my life, that I believe that something is going to come to me that's detrimental. Now, where did that lack of trust, these fears, get programmed into us? Sometimes it really comes down to that we begin to relive past events, or possibly even a future event that's not even real. We're creating an event, believing for an outcome before it even has walked its way out. I remember growing up as a young child, I got a fear of God to a degree based on my parents telling me, well, if you do this, then God won't love you. If you do this, then you'll distance yourself from God. And it started creating a fear of God, that God was going to punish me for my actions. I believe a lot of parents have used this type of fear as a tactic to control their children when they were unruly or unbehaved, and it follows us through our life. So to overcome, we have to move in faith. And simply what's happening is we're working to reprogram our mind that God wants our best for us in all areas, and we are trusting Him with our life. Some of the fears that you may have in your life, and I think we all experience this from time to time, probably the biggest two, or is the first ones on my list here, a fear of failure and a fear of being rejected. We also have fears of criticism. We have fears of being maybe even of death, or being tortured, or loss, or abused, or that which, and all of these outcomes are things that we can change by a different mindset and by a different conviction of truth. You see, fear will produce things in your life, and once the fear is removed, those things won't be produced anymore in your life. It's almost like fear is empowering an outcome to happen in your life that you're believing for. So you're believing for failure, or you're believing for rejection. Now, the New Testament believers in the early church, they had all the same kinds of fears that we have today. They were born with those two instinctive fears, but they were also having fears of failure and criticism and rejection, especially when they were sharing their faith. But what did they do to overcome those fears? What did the early apostles do to overcome and go out into the known world and change it? Well, they overcame them by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and by faith. Now, those are things that all of us can easily do to shift us out of a pattern of unhealthy fear and begin to shift us into a different type of fear. And today's topic is really the fear of the Lord, but not the unhealthy kind, the healthy kind. So I want to shift here now and start to talk about the healthy fear of the Lord. So what it really is, the healthy fear of the Lord, is repositioning or replacing this fear of failure or not measuring up, this fear of something detrimental is coming or punishment, to a place of reverence and awe for who God is. A healthy reverence and a healthy awe. Because you see, most of us, as I've said, have been taught these wrong types of fears. And when you do that, you start to live in a very guarded state with your life. You're actually waiting for the hammer to fall. So you have to start to say, I need to change how I see God. I do not see God as a punisher, which is fear. I see God as one that I'm awestruck and in wonderment over. And that is a healthy fear of the Lord. There are so many verses in Scripture about the fear of the Lord and what it brings forth in a person's life. And we could spend a lot of time here today just reading Scriptures. So I encourage you to get in there and dig out some Scriptures and see what does it really say. I'm going to give you probably at least a dozen here in the next few minutes about the fear of the Lord. So here's the first one we'll just take a look at. Proverbs 14:27. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, to depart from the snares of death. Remember I said that some people fear death, some people fear torture or something, demise is coming. Well, the fear of the Lord, how can something as punishment come into being defined as the fountain of life? The fear of the Lord, that healthy awe of God, actually brings life, and it's not just a little bit, it's a bubbling fountain, and it makes us depart from the snares of death, the things that would cause us to actually have a wrong fear or an unhealthy type of fear. You see, the word fear defined in the Hebrew coming out of the Old Testament, it means this: an awe, a reverence, a dread, a timidity, wonderful, stupendous. Those are all very positive type words and positive definitions of fear. And none of them actually has the torment that we think of fear today. A lot of that's coming out of the culture we have, out of the unhealthy movies that are out there that are very fearful and have torment in those movies, and we look at that and we pick up those kinds of fears. And even kids with Halloween, the fear that they have of what they see can be an intuition in their spirit, but it's generally something learned because somebody else said that's something to be fearful about. Now, the Greek words for fear are where we get the words phobos and phobio, meaning phobias. And these are words that can mean terror, alarm, reverence, and respect. So the Greek words are kind of divided more between the two, and you can see how the culture is beginning to change from Old and New Testament. But the fear of the Lord, when we start to look at it in the overall religious context, refers to a deep reverence, respect, and awe for God's power and God's authority. It actually does not mean a literal fear of punishment, but rather a recognition of God's holiness and a desire to live according to His will. So it means that we have to humbly submit to God and live with a consciousness of His presence in everyday life. It means a reverence for God and to be in awe of God and to go through the day looking for the awe of God instead of fearing that you have failed God. It means to know His holiness and have respect or regard. So probably one of the differences between the two fears is when you have an unhealthy fear of God, the focus is upon you. And when you have a healthy fear of God, the focus is upon God Himself. Now, these require faith, the right mindset, and the thing to realize is the healthy fear of God is for our benefit. And if we don't get that, then we will miss out on a lot of things. Let's look at this verse here. Psalms 34:9. O fear the Lord, ye His saints, for there is no want to them that fear the Lord. In other words, God is going to supply all of your needs. He's going to meet the desires of your heart when you have the right fear. those are not coming when you dread God. Those are going to come when you have the awe of God. It actually will produce blessing in your life. So if you have the right fear, what you are doing is you're engaging in the covenant of God. And all the promises of that covenant are more alive to you because you don't have dread, you have awe and reverence. He captures your attention, and he wants to show his splendor in your life. He wants to empower you to know that he will provide for you, he'll take care of you, he hears your prayers, and he has answers to everything that concerns your heart. Look what this verse says in Jeremiah 32:39. And I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever. He doesn't want your heart divided. You're fearing God of dread, and you're fearing God, trying to awe and reverence him. He wants your heart singular, one heart, one way, that you would fear me forever. It's an eternal fear that God wants to give you, an eternal awe, not an eternal punishment for what your actions are. For the good of them, it's for your good, and for your children after you. I will make an everlasting covenant with them, that I will not turn away from them to do them good, but I will put fear in their hearts, that they may not depart from me. You can literally read this and take the word fear out and say awe. I will put the awe of who I am in their hearts, and they will not depart from me. So when you look at this, we start to see that he is really talking about a generational fear. Now, the enemy is trying to make a generational fear of God into your life that's the wrong way, that you would pass on to your children. And maybe that was passed on to you from your father or mother, but he wants to bring the awe and the wonderment and all of that into our hearts, and that we would pass that on to our children. That is an amazing, amazing text. And when you continue to read on out of that verse, it starts talking about that this will cleanse us of sin, it'll cleanse us of guilt, and it's not going to take those things away because we're scared of being punished, but we're going to be voluntarily giving up the things of the world because we're captivated by God and God's great love. And we're going to put our actions into the relationship with God. And we're not doing it to avoid punishment. We're doing it just because we love him. He says that we will be a joy, that all nations will know who he is, and that punishment that we are thinking we're going to be is not actually true. It's actually a blessing coming to you. Now, this fear that we're talking about was resting upon Jesus. He was not fearful of the Father punishing him. He had an awe of the Father and what the Father's plan was. Looking at this verse in Isaiah 11, 1-3, this sevenfold Spirit of Christ, verse 2, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. Well, that's not the punishment of God or an unhealthy fear. That is the awe of God would rest upon Jesus. And everyone was awed when they saw him. And he shall make him of quick understanding in the awe of the Lord, or the fear of the Lord. In other words, he would understand the very depths of who God was in the awe of God. He shall not judge after the sight of eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. Now, Jesus had that fear upon him, and he didn't fear rejection or ridicule or punishment or falling short. He did not fear the unknowns of the day. He did not fear even the cross or death. He actually had a fear of the Father, or an awe of the Father. And he just wanted to please him from a place of love more than doing things, because if he didn't do them, he'd be punished. I mean, you think about that, it makes no sense. Well, then why would we think that way? So this fear of the Lord is actually the Son's pleasurable adoration of his Father. And it's really the emotional extremity of that wonderment of who God really is. So 2 Peter 2:17 says, honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king. So when you start to understand this deep fear of God, it's actually a deep love for God. And when you have that kind of love for God, you automatically drop things off of your life that are detrimental because you're doing it because you love him, not because you're scared you'll get punished by him. Now, I want to show you a bunch of verses here. We're just going to pull them up and we're going to read all of them. Look at all these promises we have. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. Psalms 110. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Do you see a pattern here? It's where knowledge comes, where wisdom comes, and many of these verses are talking about wisdom. A good understanding have all they that do his commandments, his praise endureth forever. And wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and the strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. Man, that is a statement. Proverbs 8:13. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride, arrogance, and evil ways, and the forward mouth do I hate. Ecclesiastes 12:13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Proverbs 15:13. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. 2 Corinthians 7:1. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Now those are lots of things and promises that we have coming straight out of the Word of God of what the fear of God will do for us in our lives. And so I hope this has brought us a little understanding, today of the difference between this unhealthy fear that many seem to have and really a healthy fear of God. It isn't so much that I'm dreading God as much as that I'm embracing who God is and what God could bring into my life. So let's go into some questions today. Boy, that was a quick 30 minutes of time, wasn't it? Questions for discussion and reflection. Number 1, how many fears are we born with and what are they? What are the fears that we're actually born with? Number 2, how does unhealthy fear come into our lives? Can you give us some examples where you see fear that came into your life and it created something very unhealthy? It probably would help other people here in the discussion. Number 3, what is the difference between healthy fear and unhealthy fear? Can you recognize the difference? Number 4, how do we combat an unhealthy fear of God? What is the answer when we have an unhealthy fear of God? And it may be more things than what I gave you here in this teaching. Number 5, what is a healthy fear of God and how or what do we gain by it? Well, I hope this helps you today in the pathway of really understanding what the true fear of God is and having a healthy fear of God and not an unhealthy fear of God. And maybe there's some shifting that you're going to have to do in your thinking. And maybe there's some shifting in the activation of your faith. Maybe there's some shifting in how you see yourself and how you see that God sees you today. So hopefully this helped you, and You can dig into this and study some more things out as well. And just bless you on your journey in the pathway of discovering who God is and what God has for you in this spiritual journey that you're on. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.